On February 24th, 2018, a story broke in the Australian city of Queanbeyan, right on the outskirts of Canberra. This story took place in the suburb of Canberra, an area of roughly 8,000 people. In an event that police found disturbing, a mother had a chance encounter with two strangers, one man and one woman, both of whom she had never seen before and has not seen since. A statement was released by the responding New South Wales police, which described the incident. Quote, "Police were told the man and woman claimed to be FACS caseworkers and produced what appeared to be an identity card. They stated they were there to check on the welfare of the children. The mother stated the children were asleep and told the pair she could call them to return when they woke. However, the pair stated they would wait. A short time later, the mother presented the children to the pair in the lounge room. After checking the children and their bedroom, the pair left the home. The woman became suspicious of the visit and contacted Queanbeyan FACS, who confirmed they had no record of the visit from any of their caseworkers, and the matter was reported to police. The woman at the center of this incident, a mother of two young children, gave police descriptions of the two strangers that had briefly examined her home and her children. The man was described as being in his 30s, was Caucasian, around 183 centimeters or 6 feet tall, with a slim build, a fair complexion, dark hair, and a prominent nose. The woman was described as being in her 20s, also Caucasian, around 170 centimeters or 5.5 feet tall, with a medium build, a tanned complexion, medium-length curly hair with a dyed streak running throughout. Both were wearing professional clothing, just about what you would expect from any social workers that were there to examine your children. Detective Chief Inspector Neil Gray described the state of the mother in the fallout of this encounter with these two strangers. Quote, "She's holding up okay, but obviously extremely upset that these persons unknown to her, and at this stage unknown, are being able to gain access to her children. FACS have confirmed that all caseworkers in the Southern District carry photo ID with their name, job title, and FACS logo. The ID that was produced was good enough to fool the young mother into letting them into the house." There have not been any other noteworthy incidents in this quiet little Australian suburb since this event happened a little over a month ago, in February of 2018. However, this incident, where two strangers appeared out of thin air, wanting to examine children for unknown, mysterious reasons, harkens back to the early 1990s, when similar rumors sent shockwaves throughout the United Kingdom, half a world away. This is a terrifying urban legend known only as phantom social workers. Welcome to Unresolved, a podcast about the unknown and the unexplained. While I normally tackle unsolved crimes, this episode will be a bit unusual. It is instead about a phenomenon which originated in the United Kingdom but spread throughout the world in a very short period of time. As you learned in the introduction, it is a story that is still relevant now, in the year 2018. Before I continue on, I'll briefly let you know how you can support the podcast. You can leave a rating and a review on iTunes, or Apple Podcast, whatever it is these days, and that is always appreciated. If a simple rating and a review isn't good enough for you, and you want to help financially support the podcast, you could do so by heading to patreon.com/unresolvedpod. There, you'll be able to get early commercial-free access to episodes, get some bonus content, and even vote for future episodes of the podcast. This episode, in fact, was a Patreon supporter-selected episode when I asked which urban legend they wanted to hear me dive into. You'll also get access to Patreon-exclusive mini-episodes, which I have begun putting together. The first, about the mysterious 2006 O'Hare incident, is going to be available for patrons to hear very shortly. Also, make sure to check out and subscribe to my new podcast, Hoax. It's a storytelling podcast very similar to this one, but centered around hoaxes and the people who perpetrate them. It's different, but it's really interesting, and I think that fans of Unresolved will probably really dig it. The last way you can help out the podcast is by supporting the companies that advertise on Unresolved, including today's sponsor, Hellofresh. Today's episode is brought to you by Hellofresh. Hellofresh is a meal kit delivery service that shops, plans, and delivers your favorite step-by-step recipes and pre-measured ingredients so that you can just cook, eat, and enjoy. What makes Hellofresh so great? Well, their handy, clearly labeled meal kits can be delivered on any day of the week, in recyclable insulated boxes. Their selection is fresh and flexible, allowing you to choose between classic, veggie, or family recipes. They make it easy to cook delicious, balanced dinners for less than $10 a meal, and they make it very simple. Each recipe is pre-portioned and ready to cook. You can try things you never thought to cook, and all of their family recipes are tested with kids in mind, so they appeal to everyone in the family. Last night, my wife and I tried out Hellofresh for the first time, preparing a delicious pasta dish. The Hellofresh meal kit came with everything we needed. The pasta, the broccoli, the pesto, the chili flakes, the Parmesan cheese, even the sweet Italian pork sausage, which was just as good, if not better, than the stuff I could buy at my local grocery store. It also came with a little apron, which my wife insisted I wear while I was cooking. Weird. If you want to try out Hellofresh, you could head to their website, hellofresh.com, and save $30 on your first box by using the offer code Unresolved30 at checkout. That's Unresolved30, with no spaces. Once again, you can save $30 on your first weekly HelloFresh box by using the promo code Unresolved30 at checkout. Now, without any further ado, let's learn a little bit more about the unique phenomenon called phantom social workers, and how this urban legend originated. In the winter of 1990, a woman named Elizabeth Copeland made allegations that many credit with kicking off this urban legend. 2 women knocked on the door of Copeland's home in Sheffield, England. They claimed to be from the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, also known as the NSPCC. Worried that her children were in danger, Elizabeth let the 2 women into her home, and they examined her 2 children, one of which was 2 years old, and the other was an infant, less than 6 months old. Shortly thereafter, the 2 women left, and Elizabeth simply hoped that nothing else would happen regarding this visit from the NSPCC. A couple of days later, however, one of the women returned with another partner. This time, the partner was a man. They stated that the children were being taken away from home and being placed into some kind of foster care. When Elizabeth threatened to phone the police, the 2 strangers apparently made a getaway, which one publication referred to as a, quote, diplomatic retreat. Surprisingly, the NSPCC knew nothing of these 2 visits, and stated that none of their officials had gone to visit Elizabeth Copeland on the day in question. It was never determined whether the allegations made by this panicked mother were true or false. We do know that police investigated this incident as a serious one, but they found no proof of wrongdoing from any government officials in the area. However, this would jumpstart a rash of similar encounters, which began to become prevalent in the United Kingdom during this time period. In 1990, Operation Childcare was launched in the county of South Yorkshire, which includes the city of Sheffield. Because of the claims made by Elizabeth Copeland and similar allegations made by others, Operation Childcare was created to combat the reports of child abductions and abuse perpetrated by social workers, or those pretending to be them. Led by Detective Superintendent David Foss, Operation Childcare relied on the cooperation of 23 separate police departments and agencies, all of which were working in unison on the far-reaching project. Foss would later state that the main difficulties of Operation Childcare came as a result of people believing media hype, buying into allegations without any real proof. He also stated on a later date that while he believed many of the complaints could be genuine, they were generally blown out of proportion. Lothian and Borders Police, a territorial police agency that has since been overhauled and incorporated into the Police Service of Scotland, was involved in Operation Childcare. Chief Inspector Douglas Watson, who was involved in a special unit investigating these allegations, mirrored the statements of David Foss in a 1995 news report. Quote, "There have been no arrests. We disbanded the squad in July last year. The bottom line is there is more than one team involved. There were ones we felt were worth investigating, but a lot of the reports were malicious by attention-seeking people." Despite the allegations from Elizabeth Copeland and other worried parents, it seems like there was very little proof or evidence by which police could conduct an actual investigation. There were claims of shady people asking after children, but the media began to liken these allegations to that of the Men in Black, as a hoax of sorts. Ray Wire, a sexual crimes consultant who worked with Operation Childcare, made a statement about the way in which the allegations unfolded, that of strangers approaching parents in their homes, in the middle of the day, etc. Quote, "To do it in this way is an incredibly high-risk strategy. Also, no babies were actually taken, although some children were examined. What on earth was going on? There are many other ways of getting hold of a baby." After years of investigating claims in the area of South Yorkshire and beyond, Operation Childcare was shuttered in 1994. The police forces involved had gathered over 250 reports of phantom or bogus social workers, of which they believed only 18 were worth taking seriously, and only 2 were genuine allegations. Despite the closing of Operation Childcare without any results, the claims made by worried parents in the UK were not anywhere close to stopping. Anne Wiley was another young mother who made a similar claim to that made by Elizabeth Copeland. A stranger wanted to examine her son, this time over 200 miles away, in the Scottish town of Hamilton. It was in October of 1994 when a stranger came to the back door of Anne's home to evaluate her toddler. Quote, "I thought it was strange to start off with, as no one usually comes to my back door. This woman said she was my new health visitor, and she had come to check his medical records. My son had been in hospital. He was an asthmatic. I said to her, 'Do you have identification?' And she said, 'Ugh, I must have left it in the car.' Something my usual health visitor never does. I looked at the car, and there was a gentleman in there smoking a fag, which again was strange, as you wouldn't have thought health visitors would. So I asked her my son's name, and she hesitated. But then she got out this file, and I don't know if it was my son's, but she seemed to know all his medical history, how long he'd been in hospital for, and so on. She was talking to my son, but it was pouring with rain, and I said we'd all better go into the living room. I took my son inside, and she was away." Anne Wiley described this strange woman as being in her 20s, standing around 5 feet 4 inches tall, and having a slim build with light brown hair and a small mark by her right eye. Lynn Stewart, a 35-year-old mother from the Gyle area of Edinburgh, described a similar encounter in April of 1995. According to Lynn, a woman had attempted to abduct her 4-month-old baby. Described as a bogus health visitor that came to inspect her baby, Lynn stated that the smartly dressed woman had grabbed a hold of her infant daughter and attempted to run off with her. Lynn had then attempted to fight off the other woman, claiming to have punched her in an effort to get her baby back. The incident was reported to police, and was initially linked to other attempted abductions in the area. However, police would later walk back that claim, stating that there had been sightings of a suspicious woman in the area, but no kidnapping attempts. Neighbors remained vigilant in the following days and weeks, but remained skeptical of Lynn Stewart's claims. A Lothian and Borders police spokeswoman stated just days later, quote, "We are not seeking anyone in connection with the incident. The case is now closed." It was widely believed that Lynn had concocted the story as a cry for attention and or help. She had to publicly fight back against these rumors. Quote, "As far as I'm concerned, I'm sticking by my story. It's no hoax. It all happened as I said. I'm not going to be charged with wasting police time. I've heard rumors about this. The inquiry is now over, and if you want any more information, then you'd better speak to the police." At one point, the police seemed to be teasing the possibility of filing charges against Lynn Stewart for filing a false police report. But nothing came of that, nor of any of her own claims of a strange woman attempting to abduct her child. Many believed that this incident never happened, but it would not be the last high-profile encounter in the UK. On October 10th, 1995, a man named Mark Dunn reported an incident from his home in Manchester. His wife and children were away from home at the time, when a woman, described as both well-groomed and official-looking in the news reports, knocked on his front door. She claimed to be investigating some alleged mistreatment. Mark simply asked to see the woman's identification, at which point she said she had to retrieve it from the car. He claims that she made a hasty retreat to a nearby vehicle, which had been left running. Mark allegedly saw 2 men within the car, and the 3 strangers made a quick getaway from the scene. As you can tell, many aspects of this story were similar to the ones that came before it. There were the same allegations that the perpetrator was a young woman wearing professional clothing, who needed to get her photo ID from the car and then proceeded to run off. These similar sounding stories would become commonplace throughout the 1990s, not only in the UK, but also in the United States. There were claims made, thousands of miles apart, which insinuated that men and women posing as social workers were attempting to abduct children. In 2001, nearly a decade after the first allegations were made, the Scottish Daily Record reported on another alleged incident. Quote, "Police were yesterday hunting two distinctively dressed bogus social workers who made a suspicious call at a house. The man and woman rushed off when challenged for identification at the property in Southside Beach, Inverness, on Friday. Social work bosses said they had no staff in the area at the time. The man was described as 40 to 45, 5 feet 10 inches tall, stockily built, with short ginger hair, goatee beard, wearing a green tweed sports jacket, check shirt, bright red tie, bottle green trousers, and dark rectangular framed glasses. The woman was 30 to 40, 5 feet 6 inches, with shoulder-length brown hair, wearing a green coat and brown shoes and carrying a briefcase." These claims remained just part of a pattern of allegations being made without any real evidence. There were not any real related cases in the vicinity of these alleged encounters. No children were actually abducted, no corroborating witness statements were provided, etc. It was as if these creepy incidents occurred in a vacuum, cementing them as an odd urban legend, like UFO abductions or the Men in Black or something like that. Dr. Bill Thompson, a forensic criminologist at Reading University, shared his thoughts about the possible perpetrators of this extraordinary phenomenon. He condensed the possible perpetrators as belonging to 4 distinct groups. Quote, "Some are pedophiles, some are upset women. The third person is a self-appointed child abuse investigator. The fourth group are copycats, someone with nothing better to do. Or it could be the second group again, a woman who has had a miscarriage or lost a baby. It could be someone who wants to borrow the baby, or worse, a person wants to believe it's theirs. Or finally, others want people to believe them in order to get attention, favors, or sympathy." So, at this point, I'm almost positive that you're all pretty skeptical of the troubled claims made by these parents so far. After all, none of the allegations actually led to any criminal charges being filed, and police never even identified a suspect in any of the separate cases. But, what if I told you that these various stories and allegations may have been inspired by a true story? A true story that embodies every parent's worst nightmare. In July of 1986, years before the emergence of the phantom social worker phenomenon, a young mother simply noticed bruises on the arms of her toddler. This young mother and her husband were both in their early 20s, and they were both teetotalers, meaning, of course, that they did not partake in any alcohol or drug consumption. They had 2 children together. Both were daughters who were 2 and 3 years old at the time. The bruises on the arm of this daughter had likely been caused by her playing at play school, which is the predecessor to preschool. However, that did not stop the bruises from raising some alarms during a regularly scheduled meeting with the health visitor, who was sent to check on the health of the children. The children were brought into the hospital for further evaluation, and given a place of safety order, meaning that the children were temporarily becoming wards of the state as they tried to determine whether any abuse or neglect was taking place. They were taken into a wing of the hospital, where they, and their parents, would be regularly monitored. The parents had to temporarily move into a special family unit 30 or so miles away from the hospital. If they were to refuse, they would risk their 2 children being taken away permanently. During this brief period of time, the entire family was introduced to Dr. Marietta Higgs, a young doctor who would perform a physical examination upon their daughters. Dr. Higgs had become a recent proponent of an examination called reflex anal dilation, called RAD for short. Trust me, it is as perverse as it sounds. Shortly after this invasive examination, Dr. Higgs told the 2 parents one of the worst things that a parent could ever hear. Quote, "I think it is an appropriate time to inform you of my suspicions. I strongly suspect that your eldest daughter, Lindsay, has been sexually abused." Both this child and her younger sister would have to undergo more of the procedures, in which Dr. Higgs tested her medical theories of RAD. The mother and father of the 2 children were arrested and prepared to face a criminal trial that would never come to pass. No charges were ultimately filed, but their 2 daughters were kept in social and foster care for 17 months. In that year-and-a-half time period, the parents would end up pregnant with a 3rd child. However, fearing the pending court case, they decided to opt for an abortion early in the pregnancy, not wanting that child to have to endure a life of living in foster care or being taken away from them at a later date. The 2 daughters went in and out between foster and social care, and it has been said in the years since that the 2 girls were close to getting permanently adopted out. During their stay in foster care, the 2 girls had to continuously check in with doctors and social workers to ensure that they weren't being abused or neglected. During another round of RAD testing, Dr. Marietta Higgs and her colleagues came to the conclusion that the girls were being sexually abused while in foster care. The foster family, who were also a married couple with 3 daughters of their own, were blindsided by this allegation. As the father stated, quote, "It was like being hit by a prize fighter. Marietta Higgs and the others were like religious zealots on a mission." The foster father was then arrested, and his own children were taken away from the custody of him and his wife. However, as authorities would soon learn, these allegations were just the tip of a pending iceberg. In the mid-1980s, Marietta Higgs, an Australian doctor in her mid-30s, learned about the reflex anal dilation method at a medical conference in the city of Leeds. This method, RAD, is something that I don't really want to go into detail about. You could look it up if you must. It does have a Wikipedia page after all. But to make things short, it was a very controversial physical test conducted to identify victims of sexual abuse. It was also very invasive. Dr. Marietta Higgs started implementing the RAD testing into her medical bag of tricks, and within 6 months, she was transferred to Middlesbrough General Hospital, where she teamed up with another pediatrician, Dr. Jeffrey Wyatt. Dr. Wyatt was also a fan of this method, and they began to incorporate it into their regular testing in the final months of 1986. Between February and July of 1987, 121 children in the county of Cleveland were diagnosed as sexually abused. This was a dramatic increase in reported numbers, to a significant degree. There had normally been between 25 and 40 abuse referrals a month for social workers to investigate. During this time period, that monthly number shot up to about 100. There were 81 abuse referrals made in May of 1987, and then 110 the following month. Out of those 121 children that were diagnosed as being sexually abused in their homes, 67 were made wards of the court, and 27 became the subject of a place of safety order, meaning that they had been placed in temporary social care custody. An increase of this size was going to draw attention, most notably from the families affected. They all petitioned to have their children returned home to them, stating that the methods practiced by Dr. Marietta Higgs and Dr. Jeffrey Wyatt were crude and ineffective. Simon Hawksworth, QC, who represented 38 families facing a collection of 84 charges, stated, quote, "In every case where a child has been diagnosed as sexually abused since 1 January 1987, by Drs. Higgs and Wyatt solely upon the basis of alleged physical findings, and where they raised the first suspicion or allegations of sexual abuse, it is our submission, 1. That no court has upheld their findings. 2. That in the vast majority of other cases, the local authority dropped its allegation of sexual abuse or proceedings were allowed to lapse. 3. That in cases where children were already in care and the subject of allegations of other kinds of abuse, the Higgs and Wyatt diagnosis added nothing to the welfare of the children. 4. There have been no convictions of any offenders against children." The statement was absolutely correct. The RAD method used by Drs. Higgs and Wyatt was incredibly invasive, and it provided nothing when it came to actual evidence of sexual or physical abuse. Some experts came out and stated that the only way to truly uncover signs of abuse would require professionals to listen carefully to children, using the tried and true method of careful observation. They stated that a quick and easy route, such as the RAD physical test, would never be proven because of what it demanded. that it was close to being sexual abuse in itself. On July 9, 1987, the Secretary of State for Social Services commissioned a report by Elizabeth Butler Sloss, a High Court judge assigned to the Family Division at the time. Her objective was to investigate the claims of sexual abuse laid out by Dr. Marietta Higgs and Dr. Jeffrey Wyatt, and determine if there was a widespread sex abuse scandal breaking out in the county of Cleveland. There had been, just not the one that Drs. Higgs and Wyatt anticipated. Around a year after its commission, in July of 1988, the Butler-Sloss report was released. The report, despite taking a relatively neutral approach, made it very clear that the sexual abuse allegations made by Drs. Marietta Higgs and Jeffrey Wyatt had been misguided. Quote, "In Cleveland, an honest attempt was made to address these problems by the agencies. In spring 1987, it went wrong." The report criticized the two doctors for overconfidence in their methods, stating that other methods were preferable to the unfounded RAD testing conducted by this pair of pediatricians. This report was made famous for its catchphrase, "Listen to the children," which put the emphasis in counseling and therapy over any physical examinations to determine sexual trauma in children. It also stated that children should never be subjected to repeated physical examinations, especially those as invasive as the RAD testing used in Cleveland. Most notably, the Butler-Sloss report found that most of the abuse allegations made by Drs. Higgs and Wyatt were unfounded. All but 27 children were returned home to their families. In the aftermath of this report, Dr. Marietta Higgs was moved to another hospital in a neighboring county. She had wanted to be reinstated after the scandal came to a close, but she was too much of a liability at the time. She has since gone on to continue work as a pediatrician in the county of Kent. Both her and Dr. Jeffrey Wyatt have continued to work in public hospitals since this scandal in the latter half of the 1980s. Dr. Wyatt worked at James Cook University Hospital for a period of time, and I cannot vouch for his current working status. This entire ordeal, which eventually became known as the Cleveland sex abuse scandal, ultimately led to the Children's Act of 1989. This allocated many more resources and actions for agencies to take when it came to preventing child abuse, and even led to Operation Childcare, the multi-department mission I told you about in the first half of this episode. Many believe that the actions taken by Dr. Marietta Higgs and Dr. Jeffrey Wyatt are what led to the rumors of phantom social workers. After all, when everything was said and done, the common thinking was that they had manufactured reasons to take away children from their parents, which I could slowly see transforming into a boogeyman of sorts. Years after the scandal had come to a resolution, many of the children that were taken away from their homes on the recommendation of the two pediatricians filed suit against their local governmental bodies. They claimed that they had been mistreated by the officials that were supposed to be looking out for them, and that the invasive procedures performed upon them were borderline criminal in nature. Despite history looking back at this period of time in shame, Dr. Marietta Higgs has no regrets on the way the entire incident unfolded. According to Smita Patel, a Gazette Live producer that caught up with Dr. Higgs a few years ago, quote, "To this day, Marietta Higgs doesn't accept that the diagnosis was wrong." On April 23, 2014, a woman was at her home in Queanbeyan, more specifically in the neighborhood of Deerhurst Place, at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. According to this young mother, a strange woman came calling to her house. Claiming to be from social services, she stated that there were, quote, "concerns for the welfare of her 4-month-old son." This strange woman, who was in her late 20s, stood around 5 feet 7 inches tall, with dark, shoulder-length hair, had an ID card that looked legitimate, and was carrying a black zip-up folder. She entered the family home, and briefly inspected the young mother's infant son. She used a stethoscope to listen to the boy's heartbeat before leaving, and all seemed to be on the up and up. However, when the mother contacted authorities, she learned that social services had no record of a visit being paid to her home. Detective investigator Andy Dangerfield of the local police stated about the incident, quote, "We don't know what the motivation for this was, but clearly it is very concerning. Our inquiries are ongoing. We have visited houses in the area to warn local people and would urge everyone to be vigilant." The young mother at the center of this incident helped create a sketch of the woman that had come to inspect her son. which led to a bizarre digital recreation that was published in the local media outlets. To date, nothing has been learned about this individual case, and many have wondered, is this another example of a phenomenon created by the human imagination, or is it something else entirely? Peter Rogerson, a writer who wrote a piece about sexual trauma in Magonia magazine, made his skepticism clear in 1991. Quote, "The stories of the phantom social workers, the strangers who know everything, who appear out of nowhere and disappear after acting in a strange, irrational manner, more than echo the motif of the Men in Black. None are caught, no car number plates are recorded." It's possible that the idea of these phantom or bogus social workers descend from the UK's rampant allegations of child abuse. There have been claims that thousands of children have been victimized over the years by cabals that operate in the shadows of society, intermingling with the rich and the famous. Of course, we have seen specific examples of this, such as the Jimmy Savile scandal, which unearthed decades of child abuse by a single individual. Operation U-Tree, which was very similar to Operation Childcare from the early 1990s, was launched in 2012. Quickly, it took on a life of its own, growing from a simple inquiry to a full-blown criminal investigation. It managed to build convincing cases against several public figures, including entertainers, politicians, and wealthy businessmen, for engaging in child abuse over decades. While no country is immune from having its own scandals, the UK has become a notorious hotbed for these type of scandals that have plagued the country over the last half-decade or so. About a dozen of these child abuse scandals have grown to the point of having their own Wikipedia page. I know I often use that as the benchmark of something reaching the peak of notoriety, but I believe that's definitely true in this case. The allegations of abuse coming out of the UK over the past few years have really shined a light on how mistreated children have been over the last few decades. Lord Warner, a former health minister who had conducted an inquiry into child abuse allegations in the early 1990s, stated, quote, "It is possible that people who were authoritative, powerful in particular communities, did sometimes have access to children's homes. We know for historical purposes that children's homes were a supply line sometimes. Is it possible that, over the years, these countless allegations needed a face to put on their trauma? A convenient boogeyman that acted as an intermediate between the young victims and survivors, and the people behind these various scandals? It's possible that we'll never truly understand what drives these allegations of phantom social workers, whether they come from a place of truth, or they are simply a phenomenon created by those that want attention. That is why I consider the urban legend of the phantom, or bogus, social workers to be ultimately unresolved. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Unresolved. I'll try to keep the end credits brief this time. As you may have been able to tell, my voice is not exactly in tip-top shape because I'm currently getting over a pretty nasty cold. Hence, the delay between the last episode and this one. Sorry everyone. If you want to stay in touch with the podcast, you could send in your emails to theunresolvedpodcast@gmail.com, or to keep it simple, you could send them in to unresolvedpod@gmail.com or michael@unresolved.me. You could find the podcast on Facebook and Twitter, @UnresolvedPod for both. If you want to call in and leave a voicemail, or send in a text message, you could do so at 831-200-3550. Once again, that's 831-200-3550. If you want to support the podcast, you could head to patreon.com/unresolvedpod. Or, if you could simply head to iTunes and leave the podcast a 5-star review, that would be awesome. Everyone that's done that already, you're awesome. Thank you. Also, make sure to do the same for Hoax, which is my other podcast. Any support is appreciated, and I hope that you all enjoyed listening to it as much as I have enjoyed making it. I promise that the wait for the next episode will not be as long as it was for this one, at least as long as my voice box continues to cooperate. Cold season is not over yet, apparently. Before I go, I'm going to play for you a promo of a show hosted by some friends of mine. My buddies at the podcast Criminology have been so awesome, and they're currently in the middle of their second season, closely examining the story of the Golden State Killer. The hosts are awesome, and I personally cannot wait to hang out with them and everyone else at CrimeCon. Anyhow, stay safe everyone, and I'll talk to you later.
Imagine for a moment that you are lying in your bed. You are under your covers. You have turned down the lights. You have locked the doors. You feel safe, at ease, protected, as you begin to fall asleep, like you have done countless times before. It's just another night, right?
He's standing in her doorway. He's got a ski mask on. He's got a t-shirt on. He's got a knife. But he's nude from the waist down.
A 21-year-old Air Force sergeant and his 20-year-old wife were shot to death Thursday night as they walked their dog on a quiet residential street in Rancho Cordova.
We had heard somebody breathe and then had been shot.
We got a radio call, and the radio call was just that we think there's been an attack, gave out the address, and right where I am parked in front of that house.
He was getting more and more deranged. He really wanted to hurt somebody out there bad.
I have not experienced any fear in this community before or since the East Area rapist. He was sure that we were going to catch this guy.
City police and sheriff's detectives scheduled a meeting today to coordinate their search for the so-called East Side rapist, believed to be responsible for attacks on 11 Sacramento women in the past year.
There was another rape, and this just went on and on and on.
During that time, they had heard a noise. Janelle looked out the window, but she didn't see anything. She had been raped and bludgeoned.
The yellow police tape was stretched across the end of the cul-de-sac, and then it was all around our house.
It's a matter of understanding who you're hunting.
There was a flashlight in my eyes, and a man stood there with a ski mask on, and he was holding a large butcher knife.
He grabbed me, had me get out of bed, walked me out of the room, down the hall, and into the family room.
I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I would say, what did I do wrong? What did I miss?